Hi, today I want to talk about terroir. This is a term you may or may not have heard, and if you hang around wine people enough, you will eventually hear it. If you do any reading on it, it's a very popular term. Terroir is based in French. It's roughly speaking, it means earth or ground or the soil, the whatever it was grown in, if you take the root word. Now, oftentimes, you'll find this in English as well as any other language, even though a word actually means one thing, it can have a whole expanded meaning. And I'll give you an example of that. When somebody says home, they're not talking about just a house. They're not just talking about the place they live. And especially if you're talking the family home, the traditional family home, you're talking about, yes, the house, the building, but you're talking more about the spirit of being with family, close people you're close to, this type of thing. So home is a lot different in meaning than house. In the same sense, terroir is a lot different than just the ground in which grapes are grown. Terroir really considers, in addition to the emotional context, it considers a lot of other things. For example, climate. The climate in one part of a small area, relatively small area, like a county in the US, can be very different on one end than the other end. Good examples of that are in California, Napa, Sonoma. Sonoma, I think actually more so than Napa, it's a little bit bigger, but you have different parts of Sonoma County that produce very different terroirs, one from the other. So in this part, Chalk Hill, I think it is, one of my favorite ones, the name escapes me for sure, has a very, not unsurprising, chalky soil, so you've got a lot of calcium there. Grapes grown in that will produce a flavor different than grapes grown in a different type of soil. So you've got the soil context, the geology of the land. Then you also have, in one area or another, you've got winds coming in off the ocean or not. You've got cool and dry, cool and wet, hot and dry, hot and wet, all these different types of combinations for climate. How much rain, how much sun is typically experienced in a year. You've got the soil to consider, you've got the exposure even. If you've got a hill here, it faces south, say, it's going to have a different terroir than the same hill on the east or the west side, and certainly from the north side. So all these factors influence the grapevines, which of course influences the flavor of the grapes themselves. These are all parts of terroir. Now, often people will add into that the actual vintner and venting process. So you have old man Joe over there who's been making wine for 100 years or so on this particular parcel of land. So he's got his way of doing it. He may have passed some of that on to a son or grandson or someone or some other person, and he passes away. Now the next person, same land, same everything, comes in and their wine will taste a little different because they have their own personal terroir that they're throwing into it. Some people might disagree with me on that, but I can see the differences in some people, everything else being the same as one vintner versus another. So there's a lot of things to consider. The terroir basically describes the complete environment of that particular wine that you're drinking. So it's a really interesting term. It's more romantic than scientific in a lot of senses, but it's something you should know about. So that's something to consider if you ever go to a vineyard. Check around, notice the things like this. What kind of soil is it? What kind of exposure do they have to the sun? Is it direct rays in? Is it more morning sun versus afternoon sun? These types of things all influence it. So with that in mind, something else to think about when you're sipping on that wonderful glass of wine. So cheers. Well, normally it's on the bottle. If there's no vintage on it, that means the wine is a mix of multiple years. So a little bit side note there, I haven't planned on talking about that. But typically when you buy a bottle of wine, you'll see a date on it in the sense of the year.